Today is a day that we set aside and we actually celebrate mothers, right? It's called Mother's Day. Well, I thought it would be fitting for us to take a look at some mothers who oftentimes get overlooked in the Bible. So, you might be wondering, why is today's lesson called Deliverance? Well, let me explain. Deliverance that we're talking about, it's not like a baby delivery type thing, okay? We're talking about a different type of deliverance right here. This word deliverance appears, and it is really the same word as salvation. Now, ultimately, this salvation is brought about by God. And whenever we hear the word salvation, we usually think about that as, oh, the spiritual sense of it. But really, the whole thing about salvation is it is deliverance. It's whenever God delivers us from whether that be a spiritual thing that is oppressing us or a physical thing. Deliverance is what we see here in the book of Exodus. The very first time that that word is used in the Bible is with Moses and the crossing of the Red Sea. Of course, we know Moses. He's the one that the law of Moses is named after. But yet, the story of Moses includes several mothers, and all of them help this deliverance, that first deliverance that's mentioned, even be possible. So we're not going to look so much at the Red Sea crossing, though we will get to it just a little bit today, but we're going to look to maybe a little bit more at a different body of water that takes place. And we're going to go back a little bit to the first couple of chapters of Exodus. And let's see some of these mothers that are oftentimes overlooked. So in Exodus chapter 1, what we start to see is there's a king of Egypt. We usually call him Pharaoh, and I might go back and forth between if I call him the king of Egypt or if I call him Pharaoh. But here in verse 15, he's referred to as the king of Egypt. He is mistreating the Hebrew slaves. That is probably an understatement. It is an understatement. He goes so far as to say that whenever the Hebrew have babies, that if it's a boy, to kill him. If it's a girl, let her live. Interestingly enough, apparently he thinks the boys are going to be the ones that are going to cause problems with him. And he doesn't think that the girls are going to have, any type of problems with him for whatever reason. But what I want us to do is I want us to see these two women. They are first referred to as these midwives, Shifra and Pua. I know, I didn't name them. Yes, they're kind of weird names, and maybe that's why we don't really know them. But those two names, these two midwives, the ones who helped those Hebrew women give birth, they did so much to bring about this deliverance. In Exodus chapter 1, verse 17, we read that the midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. So we see these two women, they provided deliverance by fearing God. And without their courage to do what's right, where would Moses be? Think about that. Where would any of these Hebrew babies be if these midwives had not feared God and chose to follow him instead of listen to whatever the king was saying during their time? But there's a little bit more for us to look at these midwives as well. In verses 18 through 21, now we start to see that these midwives, they become mothers themselves, and they are blessed by God. In fact, what we start to see is, they have this conversation because they have to give an account to the king of Egypt for what they're doing, and they tell him some type of explanation. I don't know how well it works for him, but whatever the case, we see that they are saying what needs to be said in order for this to continue on and for the king to be, appeased, for his curiosity to be appeased. And in verses 20 and 21, though, we notice what God did to these women, or for these women. It says, "So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own." Now, right here, we don't look at these mothers very often. Yet, the Bible even does record their names. Yeah, they're weird names, so maybe that's why we don't mention them too much. This is really about the only time that we really see these women, so maybe that's another reason why we don't talk about them all that much. But these midwives, they feared God, and because of that, they had families of their own. They became mothers of their own. And without a doubt, I'm sure that the types of mothers that they were was wonderful in their households because they chose to do what God wanted them to do, to fear God, to be faithful to God, no matter what other people might be telling them. So, this is a couple of the women that we are introduced to in Exodus 1. But they're not the only mothers that are at the very beginning of Moses' story, though. Because in the next chapter, we're going to be introduced to Moses' family. Let's take a look at that together. In Exodus chapter 2, verses 1 through 4, we start to see a little bit of this. This is a very familiar passage. This is probably more familiar than those other two women from before. But here we read, "Now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him." So Moses' mother, who is unnamed at first, right? It's just kind of like, okay, a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman. I mean, you don't really get even the name of the man or the name of the woman because really that's not important in this point. They will be named later, right? But Moses' mother right here, she helped this deliverance from the Nile by taking this papyrus basket, making this papyrus basket and basically turning it into a small boat that was going to deliver baby Moses. Now, oddly enough, yes, she was listening to what the king of Egypt was saying whenever the king of Egypt was, saying to put the babies in the Nile, but yet here she provided this deliverance by this basket that was going to carry baby Moses through the waters. You see what type of love and type of providence that this mother of Moses was able to do right here at the very beginning, right? And of course, we do know later that Moses' mother, she is given a name, of course. She always had that name, and she's mentioned specifically in the scriptures. A little bit later in Numbers chapter 26, verse 25, we start to see that Jochebed is her name. And we also see the name of Moses' sister, and that is Miriam, right? So we see both of these two. So Jochebed is Moses' mother, and she helped provide that deliverance by making sure that that boat was going to safely bring her child across the waters, right? And now we also see Miriam. Miriam is Moses' sister, and really at this point, she doesn't have children of her own. She's not really a mother, but yet she displays these motherly qualities right here. That's another reason why I want to kind of include her. It's not just about women. I'm sorry. It's not just about mothers today. It's also just about women in general. Because sometimes women who aren't themselves mothers can step up and kind of fill that type of role, or can step up and have these motherly instincts and do these motherly things. So right here, Miriam is the one who's going to be standing at the distance and who is going to see what is happening right here. Now, Miriam, of course, later we start to see the type of person that she herself is. So let's fast forward in the story just a little bit, and we're going to see that Miriam appears after that Red Sea, right after the Red Sea crossing, and God provided that huge miracle of parting the waters, and all the Israelites walk through. Miriam appears right there. In Exodus chapter 15, we start to see in verse 19, that's the whole story that I just kind of mentioned about the waters parting. And then the Israelites were able to get safely through on dry ground. And then the waters came back. And then Miriam, she praises God for that. In verses 20 and 21 of Exodus 15, we read that then Miriam the prophet, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women followed her with timbrels and dancing. Miriam sang to them, "Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and rider he has hurled into the sea." Yeah, it's an interesting song, right? Okay, so apparently she was a songwriter of sorts. She's called a prophet right here. And she was a leader among the women because all the women followed her. So whenever we are fast forwarding into this story and seeing this Exodus moment, this crossing of the Red Sea, Miriam leads the Hebrew women in this worship because of God's deliverance and how God has ultimately provided that deliverance for the entire nation. Let's go back to Exodus 1 and 2, right? And let's keep looking because we have another mother that we are going to look at. Now, this mother is perhaps the most fascinating of them all. In Exodus chapter 2, verses 5 through 7, we read this. "Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the river bank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. 'This is one of the Hebrew babies,' she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, 'Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?' Okay, so let's just pause right here with this question lingering on the ears of Pharaoh's daughter, right? This is the next mother that we're going to look at. Pharaoh's daughter. I know, she isn't even a Hebrew, right? And she has no known connections to any of the Hebrews. Like, she should have no reason why she has concern for these Hebrew babies, no reason why she should really care about them, like, at all. Because in her mind, and how she's been brought up, because remember, it's her dad who's the one who's in control, right? He's the king. So, from everything that she's been raised to believe, these are slaves. I mean, why should she care if that there's a baby slave that is crying? But she heard that crying. She came to it and she recognized what was going on. And she chose to do something about it. It even says that she felt sorry for him. Talk about some of these motherly instincts, right? There's no known connection to the Hebrew people. She is not a Hebrew herself, yet she still cared for Moses. She felt sorry for Moses. And, perhaps we need to allow Mother's Day to honor mothers like her too. Because when asked with this question by Miriam, Miriam comes up and she's like, okay, shall I get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? Well, how is she going to respond? You probably already know the story, but let's keep reading it. Verses 8 through 10. Yes, go, she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you. So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, I drew him out of the water. So all of these mothers that we've looked at right here, in their own way, they all helped bring about God's deliverance. So I want us to look at these mothers, and I want us to think about that here. Because, as we look at this story, we see that this is the origin story of Moses himself. In fact, as far as how the story goes in verse 10 right here, we see that, yes, Moses was raised up by his own mother for a time, was nursed by his own mother, but then as the child grew up, he went back to Pharaoh's daughter. He became Pharaoh's daughter's son. And it was Pharaoh's daughter, apparently, that named him Moses because he was drawn out of the water. It's kind of interesting, right? If you fast forward with the life of Moses and see all the different ways that water connects with him, but it comes back to this this woman, right? This Pharaoh's daughter, this mother that wasn't even a Hebrew, but maybe she knew something about the story. I don't know. Whatever the case, it's a very amazing story. But all this story of Moses, it would have never happened if this deliverance had not happened through the hands of these mothers. So whenever we look at about how each one of them were bringing about God's deliverance, I want us to ask some questions today. What about us today? Are we willing to be like Jochebed and Miriam and raise up our own families? Whether that be, if they're our siblings or if they're, our own flesh and blood or, whatever the case here. Are we willing to raise up our own families and teach them the ways of the Lord? Because that's what we see from those mothers. And also, in addition to that, will we stand up for what's right? Like those midwives, right? Shifra and Pua, that were willing to help those in extreme need. Are we willing to do the same? And are we willing to help those in extreme need, even if it's our own family that is bringing about the injustice? And to this, I turn our attention to Pharaoh's daughter. It was her own family members that were bringing about that injustice. She's not even a Hebrew. She's not even supposed to be, part of the children of Israel, the family of God, all of those things. But yet she cares, and she's still listening to what God is doing right here, and she is being obedient to God's deliverance. Can we learn from these mothers, and can we be like them to care for those people who are in need? That's what we've been taught by our Father in heaven. That's what we've been taught by Jesus Christ, his Son. That's what he demonstrated whenever he walked here on this earth. And he's asked us to learn these lessons and to be willing to help those people in need. Are we willing to learn this lesson from these mothers that we oftentimes overlooked, who are from all different walks of life and all different backgrounds and stuff, but yet they still cared. They still did what a mother was called to do. Can we learn some lessons? I think so. But let's make sure that we don't just read these stories and say, oh, that's a good story. No, no, no. Let's actually learn from it. And let's allow it to change our lives in some positive ways.